Let's go across and cut into the RBI presser.
Whether we should be worried about or not, and what is your assessment of the situation, sir? Thank you.
I think this question, we fairly covered in my statement as to what its impact really is going to be globally as well as for the Indian economy. Globally, you are aware that most of the forecasts now for the GDP growth rate have, for the global growth rate, have come down, by at least 20 to 30 basis points, not only for this year, even, for next year. And similarly, inflation, there is mixed response globally for inflation, especially for US. It's projected forecast to go up because of the tariffs that they will be imposing. For other countries, the impact would be different, depending on the situation that they are in. For India, we have given, our assessment. As you can see, the growth rate we have reduced by 20 basis points this year, primarily arising out of the uncertainties, the various channels through which this I elaborated in detail in my statement. And on the inflation front, we have said, it can move actually both ways because of the surplus, because of the demand that is going to shrink as a result of the trade tariff friction. It may help. On the inflation front. You are seeing that the crude prices have also gone down. So, all in all, more than inflation, we are concerned about its impact on growth. And accordingly, you can read the statement for further details. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next we'll have Lata from CNBC.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Governor, you had said that the real rate for you should be 150 basis points in a previous conference. Now, per your forecast, throughout this year, inflation is going to be below 4%. In which case, the real rate today is actually 200 basis points. So, do you think there is a chance for a double rate cut should have been already, like a 50 basis? Because we are very far away from that 150 real rate. We are at 200. And do you think the real rate itself should be 5/4 because you are expecting inflation to be even below 4%? How would you assess that? And just a related question, liquidity in the past, the Reserve Bank has guided on the liquidity amount. That helps transmission, basically. They have said that we want liquidity to be 1 to 1.5% of NDTL or negative 1 to 1.5% of NDTL. Would you want to give the bankers some comfort zone like that? My liquidity threshold is 2 lakh crore or some percentage of deposits so that transmission happens.
So this figure of 1.5%, I don't recall, having made it. Maybe some of my predecessors may have made that statement. I think from studies that we have, the real rate is to be in the range of, different studies are there, from 1.1% to 1.9%. So 1.5% is quite a plausible, real rate or a natural real rate, as you call it, over there. Insofar as the policy rate is concerned now going forward, we have, as you can see, we have changed the stance from neutral to accommodative. So obviously, the trend is going to be downwards. As regards inflation, the average is 4% this year. The average next year, we really don't know, right?
The calendar year it is below 4.
For the calendar year, yes, it is below 4. But for the next quarter, for the first quarter, it is more than 4%. We will look at, the evolving situation as we have already mentioned, and basis our forecast and outlook for the growth and the inflation. As you are aware, these are uncertain times, and so we will take a call as to where the policy rate should actually move to. With regard to liquidity, I already made a mention in the statement without giving any numbers over there that we will keep it sufficiently in surplus. I again reiterate, that we will provide sufficient liquidity for the purposes of monetary policy transmission. I don't want to give a number, really, as to what kind of a surplus, but sufficiently in surplus. And you mentioned, linking it to NDTL. Well, yes, that is the kind of number, about 1% or so in the surplus range now that, we are on the easing cycle. That is the kind of, number that we will be looking at. And we'll keep it sufficiently, surplus. The aim really is to look at the policy rate. So if we are able to transmit it, to the overnight rate, hopefully it will then transfer to the other short-term, medium-term, and the long-term interest rates. Transmission, you are aware, it takes a little while. It's not over. It will not happen, immediately. We have seen it in the past, that transmission, when we increased it by the repo rate by 250 basis points, it took 6 to 9 months at least, for the interest rates to decrease in response to the policy repo rate decrease. And they also, did not decrease to a corresponding amount. The decrease was about 204 basis points only, as against the 250 basis points increase in the repo rate. So we are watchful. We will provide sufficient liquidity to the system so that this transmission of the policy rate into the interest rate happens quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to Mr. Vishwanath from NDTV Profit.
Thank you for the opportunity, Governor. I must say, happy to be back in this room. It's looking a little better now. I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned transmission, I just wanted to get a view that there was a view from the RBI, or at least reports suggested that there was a view from the RBI that credit deposit ratios at banks were, private banks were way too high, and that they needed to come down. Now that we're talking about transmission, eventually, obviously, that will have to translate to higher lending. Are you happy with the credit deposit ratio at this point in time? And the second part is then there's a view that RBI will have to do, or the monetary policy will have to do the heavy lifting in supporting the economy in the current macroeconomic setup. Do you agree with that? Do you think that you have a bigger responsibility to manage in the current scenario?
So coming to your first question, CD ratio, see, when we were in the districts, then we would look at CD ratio basically to see as to whether the credit as a percentage, of the deposits is sufficient, whether, the lending is going on sufficiently. And at that point of time, I'm talking about 25, 30 years, we used to think that 70, 75%, is very good. So some regions, have low because they are savers. Some, where there are more of borrowers, you have high CD ratios. Coming, to your question, CD ratio, well, we do not have, any such prescription of a CD ratio. You are aware that there are no regulations for CD ratio. And however, we do have regulations for asset liability management. That's more important. We have regulations for liquidity management, and there are regulations for liquidity, for the short term in the form of the LCR guidelines that you are aware of over the 30-day period, requiring banks to maintain, and even NBFCs to maintain high-quality liquid assets. And similarly, for a longer one-year duration, there is this NSFR, NFSR ratio that we have prescribed. There is no ratio or no guideline with regard to CD. The banks have to be actually mindful of managing their asset liability, which is important. They have to be mindful and ensure that they have liquidity, both short-term and sufficient funds, over medium and long-term, so that there are no mismatches and there are no liquidity-related issues. So they can look at, their own assets, liabilities, and make a business plan according to them. We do not have any prescription for CD ratio. It is for the banks to decide. Your second question, it's a joint effort. Who does more of the heavy lifting, etc. It's a joint effort. the government has done its bit. I think in the budget that you saw recently, a large number of measures, whether it is in terms of the increased capex, whether it is in terms of the tax rebates on the personal income tax side, and we will also, we have reduced repo rates. We have changed the stance going forward, which means that the direction of the policy repo rate is downwards. Where it will reach, Lata, of course, asked that question. We really don't know. I am Sanjay, but I am not Sanjay of Mahabharat to be able to, foresee that far. I do not have that that divine vision, that he had. But we will jointly, try to manage the growth and the inflation dynamic in our country.
थैंक यू सर। अब मैं ईटी स्वदेश के अनुराग शाह को आमंत्रित करता हूं।
नमस्ते सर। सर, जो पर्सनल लोन पे आरबीआई की चिंता थी, अब उस किस तरह का रुख है? क्योंकि हमने FY25 में देखा है कि सबसे बड़ा सेगमेंट जो है पर्सनल लोन का रहा है। तो अब जिस तरह से सर पर्सनल लोन के अंदर ही टेक्नोलॉजी बदल रही है और अलग अलग सेगमेंट भी उभर के बाहर आ रहे हैं, जिसमें हमने देखा है कि जो आम लोग हैं इसमें हिस्सा ले रहे हैं, जैसे हेल्थ केयर हो गया, इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम वगैरह भी पर्सनल लोन के हिस्से में आ रहा है और वहां पे बड़ी अमाउंट पे ब्याज भी वसूला जा रहा है। तो क्या जो आज को लेंडिंग से जुड़ा हुआ जो आपने ऐलान किया है, वहां पर राहत देते हुए उस संदर्भ में है, या फिर एक अलग सेगमेंट बनाया जा सकता है जहां पर जो जरूरी चीजों से जुड़ा हुआ लोन लोग लेते हैं उन्हें राहत दी जा सके? और सर दूसरा छोटा सा सवाल होगा सर, जो आरबीआई का पहले रुख था कि जो बैंकों की सब्सिडरी है, इंश्योरेंस सब्सिडरी, वहां पे 20% तक ही आप हिस्सा अलाउ कर रहे थे, लेकिन हमने पिछले 3-4 महीने में देखा है एक बैंक को 26% तक 2 कंपनियों में अलाउ किया है। अभी एक बैंक ने 30% तक भी हिस्सा खरीदा है। तो क्या रुख थोड़ा बदला है?
आपका पहला प्रश्न की चिंता है, तो चिंता नहीं है, कोई चिंता नहीं है। देयर इज नो वरी। जो है हमारा जो सिस्टम है वो काफी अच्छा सुदृढ़ है और काफी मजबूत है। चाहे वो टोटल आप बैंकिंग सेक्टर, एनबीएफसी सेक्टर के बारे में बात करें, या चाहे आप जो पर्सनल लोन के बारे में आपने बात की। मैं यहाँ पे आपको स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूँ कि पर्सनल लोन्स के लिए जो हमने रिस्क वेट बढ़ाया था हाल ही में 125% किया था, वो उसे एक बढ़ोतरी के रूप में नहीं देखना चाहिए, क्योंकि कोविड से पूर्व के पहले का जो रिस्क वेट था, जो हमने कोविड के समय में एक रिस्क वेट क्रेडिट को और अधिक बढ़ाने के लिए हमने वो रिस्क वेट कम किया था, तो उस लेवल को, उस रिस्क वेट को हमने वापस उस स्तर के ऊपर में हम लेकर के गए हैं। हमने उसको बढ़ाया नहीं है। हमने जो उसका ओरिजिनल जो उसका स्तर था उस स्तर के ऊपर में हम लेकर के आए हैं। दूसरी बात मैं यहाँ पे ये भी कहना चाहूंगा कि उसका जो रिस्क वेट है आज के दिन में, यदि जैसा कि कुछ लोग ऐसा मांग करते हैं कि इसको कम करना चाहिए, तो फिर उसी प्रकार से फिर जो दूसरे जो पर्सनल लोन है, क्योंकि जो हमने रिस्क वेट बढ़ाया वो बेसिकली जो अनसिक्योर्ड जो पर्सनल लोन्स थे उनके लिए बढ़ाया 125%, जो वापस से पुराना स्तर किया। तो फिर आप तो ये बात तो मानेंगे कि जो सिक्योर्ड लोन है और जो एक अनसिक्योर्ड लोन है उसमें रिस्क वेट में कुछ फर्क तो रहना चाहिए। तो वो फर्क जो पहले 25% था उसको हमने वापस से हम लाए हैं। ये कोई चिंता का कोई, लेकिन आज के दिन में हमारे लिए इसमें कोई विषय नहीं है। दूसरा आपने जो प्रश्न किया कि इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज के लिए कुछ बैंक्स का जो उसके अंदर निवेश है उसके प्रतिशत को हमने शायद बढ़ाया है। जहाँ तक मेरी जानकारी है इसमें कोई बढ़ोतरी नहीं हुई है। पहले भी कोई प्रतिशत इसके अंदर में निश्चित नहीं था। आज के दिन में कोई प्रतिशत निश्चित इसके लिए नहीं है और इसमें कोई बदलाव हमने नहीं किया है। बैंक्स, एनबीएफसी, बैंक्स, इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज में निवेश कर सकते हैं। वो 51% या उससे अधिक भी निवेश कर सकते हैं और उससे कम भी निवेश, जैसा 30% आपने कहा, वहां पे भी कर सकते हैं। कुछ इसके अंदर में बदलाव हम लोग जरूर हमने पहले उसके लिए हमने ड्राफ्ट रेगुलेशंस हमने पब्लिश किए हुए हैं, उसमें भी इस संदर्भ में कोई बदलाव प्रस्तावित नहीं है। ओवरऑल क्या किस प्रकार से स्वरूप होना चाहिए, किस प्रकार से बैंक्स अन्य सब्सिडरीज में और कंपनीज में निवेश कर सकते हैं, उसके बारे में हम शीघ्र ही उचित निर्णय लेंगे।
What would the RBI's currency management strategy be? Because the rupee would definitely be impacted by what happens to the yuan going ahead. And in the same way, so when we've seen previous periods of crisis like the GFC, COVID, etc., we saw a lot more collaboration and coordination between global central banks. Is that something that is happening even now? Is there an effort being done on that? Thank you.
My understanding is, that the impact of these tariffs on India vis-a-vis some of the other countries, you mentioned China and some of the smaller countries, is much less. Our exports overall, about 12% of GDP, less than 1%, I think, for 2%, I think, for America, for USA. You compare it with some other countries, even China. China is about 19%. Germany is 37% exports overall, and even EU, is 30% plus. So our and smaller countries, have in about 80%. I'm not talking about those countries, Vietnam, Taiwan, etc. So to that extent, we are better placed than some of the other countries. That's why you are seeing that these reciprocal tariffs on India are lower than, some of these countries, because our surplus vis-a-vis those countries is much less. And so we have, in some ways, I mentioned it in my statement also, that we have a comparative advantage. We may have, a comparative advantage vis-a-vis some of these countries insofar as the USA is concerned, but overall, of course, it is certainly still, a growth dampener. And insofar as the currency management is concerned, as you know, we do not actually intervene in the currency management. It's only, for excessive or disruptive volatility that we do so. We do not try to manage or target any rate or band or level of the Indian rupee.
Just clarifying that. So it's fair to say that, if there is a depreciating pressure on the rupee, RBI will let it slide. Is it fair to say that?
All right, so that was the presser with the RBI governor, and wherein he's trying to give us a sense that why these decisions have been taken. But the key takeaway is on the gold loan companies, because there was an uncertainty that RBI can go ahead and tighten the norms on the gold loan, and definitely a major stock reaction is what we have seen in stocks like Muthoot, Manappuram, as well as some of the related companies like IFL as well as CSB Bank. But RBI in the presser has clarified that they didn't say actually that the gold loans rules are being tightened. They did, of course, touch upon that the draft rules or the draft guidelines will be in place, and that will be in place shortly. But overall, tightening of the gold loan rules is not something that RBI is focusing on. That was the key concern, that why we have seen all these companies taking a sharp knock. But after this statement, a recovery in the same quantum is what we are witnessing. Take a look at stocks like Manappuram, Muthoot as well as IFL. These stocks are seen to be recovering at the day's lowest point. Other than that, what RBI is saying on the currency front, he's highlighting that we do not target a level of currency at this point in time. During the announcement, he did say that what's been happening globally, well, of course, there could be implications on the currency front. RBI in the past has taken steps to improve the liquidity. So that's the key takeaway coming in from the RBI. We'll watch out for some more headlines.